All right. Good evening, everybody. It's call and response. Come on, a little religion in here, as we're going to talk about. My name is Ryan Paul. I teach history here at SUU, and along with my colleague Sarah Greener and others here on campus, we've been putting together the SUU America 250 lecture series. This is our sixth. We started back in July. So we have a few more, six more, obviously. Just as a side note, I'll give you the next three. Starting in January, January 22nd, Professor Kevin Kuntz from Outdoor Pathways is going to be talking about Hetch Hetchy, Yosemite's Lost Valley. And that'll be at an Apex thing as well, so it'll be 11:30 in the afternoon. The next two are at night. The dates are still, as we say in history, nebulous. So we'll keep it right. But February, it'll be Professor Joseph Howe of the music department and myself talking about the America 250 playlist, which is on Spotify. It's 250 songs that we Iron County America's 250 playlist that talk about the history of America through music, but also the history of American music. So we do that. And on March 18th, a colleague of both Josh and myself, Dr. Michelle Oriel, will present a lecture entitled To a Candid World, the American Revolution Goes Global. So, and then we'll have a few more to round that out. So thank you all for being here tonight. We're going to turn, this is of course Christmas in 1941, Churchill and Washington, presented by my friend and colleague, Dr. Josh Klein. He received his PhD, I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget, at the University of Maryland. He taught history and coached debate at Woods Cross High School from 2019 to 2024. He joined us here in the History, Sociology, and Anthropology department at SUU a year ago. Is that about right? And he his big atlas lift of the world is he's responsible for all of our history education students. So history teaching and social science composite, which is a big part of our major. So he does all of that stuff to take care of that. He's got an upcoming book on German political and intellectual history titled, I also wrote this down, The Europe Ideology and the Transformation of German Conservatism, 1930 to 1950. So look for that at all booksellers nationwide. And when? TBD,
Man.
right? And I hear from good authority that it's not in the original German. These are the jokes. I'm lighting it up before we get heavy. So, all right. So with that, again, thank you for being here, and let's give a big hand for Dr. Josh Klein.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, Professor Paul, for helping us keep our department relevant. It seems to be a hard time to make people care about history and making sure that we've been part of these America 250 celebrations. If you're not familiar with these celebrations, it's happening at the federal level. And then each state is kind of organizing them on their own, and it's left to people like Professor Paul to make sure that the community can get involved. So thank you also to the community, in addition to Dr. Paul, for showing out. I know it's hard. It's December. It's a holiday month. It's late on a week, the middle of the week. Our kids got school tomorrow. Some of you do have school tomorrow. It's finals week. You are good citizens. Thank you for being here to talk about, think about sacrifices people went through. They experienced a Christmas that, God forbid, we won't ever have to go through anything comparable. And I think it's worth considering their sacrifices on behalf of us. So you're good citizens. I appreciate you. And that compliment, by the way, I do extend to students that are here, not because they want to be, but because they're getting extra credit. That's a lot of my students. So I still think you get some citizenship credit for that. I have to confess, I'm a little bit nervous. That's because my wife is here. And in addition to my wife, to my surprise, my grandma and grandpa showed up, my aunt, my in-laws. I got a lot of family here. And I guess I kind of want to impress them. I usually don't get nervous public speaking or teaching, especially with my wife, though. Last week, I was thinking about it because I knew she was coming. And it dawned on me that I don't think my wife has ever seen me do my job. I don't think she's ever seen me teach. In fact, I told her that. I said, sweetie, you've never seen me lecture before. She says, what are you talking about? You lecture me all the time. So that's why I'm nervous. She's quick. She's taking notes. So a little bit of let's discuss some expectations, give you a little bit of a roadmap for the story I want to tell you, how I want to handle it, the way we're going to look at this particular unique story. This is a very special story. It is a heartwarming story. It is a story that certainly enriches my Christmas. I hope it'll enrich your Christmas. Darn it, I forgot. I want to start by saying Merry Christmas because we don't have that many opportunities to start with a Merry Christmas salutation. This is a Christmas story. And it is heartwarming, but almost dangerously so. And here's what I mean by that. I assume most people here are the type of people that like to think about history seriously. So I assume I'm preaching to the choir when I say sometimes we make the mistake when we tell these stories about ourselves. That's all history is. It's a collection of the stories we tell about ourselves. Sometimes we make a mistake when we tell stories just to make ourselves feel good, right? I feel like we're all aware of this temptation to use history as a way to confirm our priors. And this is one of those stories that can very easily do that. It can, I mean, your America juices are going to be pumping tonight, probably at least a little bit. And that's good. That's part of it too. I certainly would like the heartwarming, endearing part of the story to come through. But I'd also like to bring some critical thinking to bear. My doctoral advisor that I studied under to get my PhD, Professor Jeffrey Kirk of the University of Maryland, he had a saying that always stuck with me. I really love it. He says, you're not doing history right until you feel just a little bit uncomfortable. Okay, so I'm going to try to follow that motto a little bit tonight. I'm going to make us feel comfortable. We're going to get the warm, hot chocolate by the fire, cozy part of the story too. But I'd also like us to subject some of our priors to scrutiny. I think a good historical story is one that arrests us metaphorically. So when I say it arrests us, I hope that this story will challenge some of maybe your beliefs, or at least force you to consider them and reinforce them and build them back up. We're going to engage with some very tricky, challenging questions, some moral dilemmas. Every good historical story should pull out some moral dilemmas. And the moral dilemma specifically I want us to focus on, that this story speaks to, is American foreign policy. Now, my students in the room know when I teach foreign policy, the way I teach it, in simple terms, is we're studying America's relationship with the rest of the world, with millions, billions of people beyond our borders. The Constitution is silent on this question. By the way, the Constitution is really short. If you haven't had a chance to read it, you really ought to. And one of the things you'll notice that I always notice when I read the Constitution is how much it doesn't say. One of those key questions that we should have as Americans, our relationship with the rest of the world, the Constitution hardly speaks to it at all. Sure, it grants powers to certain entities in our government to deal with those questions, but how they are to answer those questions, the Constitution is pretty darn quiet about it. And so what I'd like us to do is I'm going to tell you this story. I'm going to take you through first the heartwarming part, but then also try to place it within the broader narrative of the story of America's relationship with the rest of the world. Going back to the founding, I would argue between Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, there was a pretty fierce ideological split on how and to what extent we should have a relationship with the rest of the world. I think we as Americans have been fighting over that story and these two different interpretations ever since then. And this particular story, this Christmas story, 1941, fits really well into those ongoing and evolving debates. And I hope it will be a springboard opportunity for you to consider your opinion on that if you haven't yet, or at the very least to reinforce it. One last introductory thought. Because I teach history like a debate coach, I was a debate coach for 5 years. I like to tease out these tricky, challenging, political, controversial things. I'm going to be a Grinch today. Christmas shouldn't have controversy, but we're going to see a little. I've always felt it's my responsibility as a teacher to keep my bias out. That means it might be somewhat unfulfilling for some people in the audience that I'm going to raise a lot more questions than answers I'm going to give, because I think it's your job to try to give answers. So I'll do my best to keep my bias out. With that, let's start to dive into the story. But first, I think we should contextualize it. I wonder if you guys are familiar with this image, or these images, I should say. Because there's another wartime Christmas story that is, I think, maybe just as memorable, maybe even more memorable. The Christmas truce of 1914. Let's rewind the clock 27 years. I practiced my math beforehand. It's 27 years. We rewind 27 years from 1941 to 1914. We have another remarkable Christmas story at wartime. How many people, just by raise of hand, before this slide, are familiar with or have heard of the famous Christmas truce of World War I, the Christmas truce of 1914? I'm glad all my students' hands went up, because that was just on the final exam. That That was the vast majority of the room for those who looked around, right? Historians often talk about political memory or public memory. These are the stories from history that become so powerful, they get recycled back into our memory that even the people who aren't, historically engaged reading history books are familiar with the stories. This is one of those. In fact, I would suspect, without doing the research, that this story is maybe even more memorable than Christmas 1941, which is fascinating because Americans were not involved in this particular Christmas story. We are absent from the scene. A little bit of context. Of course, the world goes to war in the summer of 1914. The July crisis feeds into the invasion of Belgium and then France in August of 1914. Everybody thinks they'll be home by Christmas. They're not. The trenches of no man's land have gone up. What was supposed to be an offensive, glorious war to break out of the bourgeois conformity of the pre-World War I world instead turned into this hellscape, Tolkien-esque, this dark, murderous hellhole, a meat grinder of human beings. And Christmas comes in the middle of this stalemated war. Now, the story as it goes on, a lot of you I'm sure are familiar with the way we tell it, is a very pleasant story. In the midst of this darkness, very much like the Star of Bethlehem and Christmas is this light of hope in the Christian narrative of a hopeless humanity fallen, waiting for the Prince of Peace. This story seems to be like a metaphorical Star of Bethlehem, right? Because you know how it goes from here. That the soldiers give up their arms, they fraternize, they play soccer. This is like one of the cutest moments of the Christmas truce for me, is the fact that both to this day, the German and British national teams claim victory in this game. And it's undecided. So we're not really sure who won. It wasn't really officiated very well. So look, that's something heartwarming about that we found our humanity, in the midst of all this darkness. Let me actually show you a clip that I hope you will see over romanticizes it, because I want to talk about to the extent this story is actually a whitewashed memory. Yeah, my students know this one. Whoops.
Jenkins, Oakley, Knight. Ein Berichter kommt! Ein Berichter kommt!
Jim? Jim, don't do it!
Halt! Er ist nicht bewaffnet! Nein, Otto!
Jim!
My name is Jim. Mein Name ist Otto. Pleased to meet you, Otto. Freut mich. Rose, she's called. Ist schön. Ist schön. Happy Christmas. Frohe Weihnachten.
All right, you guys, perfect still frame actually for what I wanted to talk about next. So I hope you, maybe some of you have seen this clip before, but I hope you certainly this time took a critical eye to it. It's telling a story. We're supposed to draw meaning from this chapter of history in a very particular direction, right? In fact, the final 30 seconds of the commercial really exposes its motivations. This is a corporation profiting off of history. This is a Cadbury chocolate commercial. Okay. So they're drawing upon our happy, cozy feelings about how humanity shone through during World War I to make money off of us. Okay, that first of all is offensive. A Cadbury chocolate's good, but that's unforgivable. Two, maybe the bigger problem is that they haven't taken the rest of the story beyond December 25th, 1914. What about December 26th? My students will know this because I talk about this, and I'm sure some other people in the audience will know this as well. These soldiers went back to killing one another December 26th. The vast majority of them. There were very few who refused. The officers who organized, or I should say allowed for these fraternizations to happen. By the way, there was more than one Christmas truce that happened across multiple points of the front in eastern Belgium and northwest France. The officers who allowed for this were oftentimes reprimanded. They lost their positions in the military. In the German case particular, they have very little patience for kindness in the German military. And so these officers were court-martialed in many cases, reassigned, lost their ranks. It's a sad story. Governments didn't allow the story to be told for many months afterwards. And when the story is finally reported on in the early spring of 1915, it's reported on in the lens of these young men being traitors, committing treason, fraternization with the enemy. Because that's the narrative the various governments of World War I wanted. It's a tragedy story, and I hate to be the Grinch here, but it's not a happy, wonderful story. It's a sad story. It's one of the reasons why the United States is not part of this video. The United States sees this war to be a corrupt, unnecessary war, people killing themselves senselessly for no real understandable reason. And stories like this and how it was handled and hushed up really reinforced for a lot of Americans in 1915 and 1916, good riddance. This is where we should have stayed out. So what I want to do now is fast forward the 27 years, Christmas 1941, and I wanted this story to be the context for what we're going to try to do, which is something similar. We're going to tell the heartwarming, cozy part of the story, which just like this one has a lot of truth in it. And then we're going to look at it a little more critically. So let's talk about why this is such a heroic moment. Churchill's visit to Washington in 1941. You really have to understand the context of December 1941. This is the real nadir, like in a movie has a nadir before it gets good, right? This is the real low point of the broader story of World War II. Let's start with the United States. December 7th, 1941, of course, Pearl Harbor, 3,500 Americans are slaughtered in this dastardly attack after peace feelers and everything from the Japanese government. We lose most of our best vessels. By some miracle, we did not lose our four most important vessels, our carrier fleet. But we're reeling. We're reeling at this moment in 1941. We're hurting. And it's not just the United States. If there's something I can impress upon you as a European historian, it's that this is the height moment for the Axis powers globally. Let's look at Nazi Germany, for example. Okay, Nazi Germany has expanded deep into Africa. They've pushed British forces beyond Libya. In fact, the British don't finally start to stop the Germans' advance towards Egypt at the Battle of El Alamein until late 1942. Most of Europe has fallen under Nazi domination. The Nazis are expanding deep into the Soviet Union. The one power that this moment in the war, after most of the continent has fallen, that people hold out hopes can maybe stop the fascist war machine is Joseph Stalin's Soviet Union. The communist dictatorship for the first 6 months of that fight seems to be crumbling before the eyes of the world. Battle of Kiev, Smolensk, the German march through Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. You see this little pocket here. German soldiers in their journals in December 1941, at the same moment our story is happening, report seeing the glint off of the Kremlin. They're within 7 miles of the Soviet capital. If you're an intelligent observer of the world in 1941, if you're the type of person who reads up on your foreign affairs, even if you were opposed to fascism, you would be insane to believe that victory could be accomplished for the Allies, at least total victory. Maybe your most optimistic hope would be some kind of truce with the fascists. Here's, by the way, a famous photo of Hitler before the Eiffel Tower in Paris. It was almost inconceivable that fascism could be stopped at this moment. There's reason for pessimism, and I'm a pretty naturally pessimistic person. My family knows this. But I do think, even beyond my personal pessimism, there's good reason for pessimism if you are a person in December 1941 who opposed fascism. We can look at Asia as well. Japan, of course, part of their attack on Pearl Harbor was a preemptive attack throughout broader Southeast Asia. This is the extent of the Japanese realm. It's actually later in 1942. But in these moments in December of 1941, after hitting us at Pearl, they're advancing on British colonies in Hong Kong, Malaya, American colony in the Philippines. It's a scary time. And then if I can just bring up one more very personal example, I am by training a Holocaust historian. I study Nazi Germany and the Holocaust. The Holocaust has just begun in these months. July and August 1941, the Nazi Holocaust genocide begins to get underway with the mass shooting of the Jews of the Soviet Union into death pits. This photo in particular is maybe the most arresting photo for me personally from the entire history of the Holocaust. A mother protecting her child in their last moments of life before being killed into a death pit of Holocaust. Okay, in the midst of this darkness, something remarkable happens, something that maybe a lot of you will agree with me is almost hard to imagine us being able to accomplish today. By the end of the month, 134,000 Americans volunteered to fight this hopeless war, right? 134,000 Americans, not conscripted. These are just the volunteers. Many more hundreds of thousands are going to be conscripted and fulfill their duty that way too. 134,000 volunteers by the end of the month. I think that's pretty remarkable. There was one other thing I wanted to mention that I think is pretty special. Oh, that's right. There's some personal tragedies too. We think of history in terms of big numbers, but on a more personal level, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, President of the United States, his mother has just died a few months before. He's dealing with the trauma of his mom dying. And on top of that, the four Roosevelt boys have all been stationed abroad. So their family is away. His mother's recently died. This is a hard time to have any kind of courage in a moment like this. It's in the midst of this moment that Churchill telegrams FDR on December 10th. Japan attacks us December 7th, Pearl Harbor. December 8th, we declare war on Japan. A lot of people don't know we don't immediately declare war on Nazi Germany. Nazi Germany actually declares war on us on December 10th. It's within hours of that declaration, Churchill sends a telegram to FDR and says, hey, we got this. I want to come visit you. Let's rally the world. Let's rally the free world against this horrific menace that is on the rise. Let's talk about Churchill crossing the Atlantic, why this was, in fact, such a brave thing. Churchill had a lot of brave moments. This is up there, I think, at least in his top 5. FDR tells him, don't do it. This is a bad idea. At this moment, we can't lose one of our most powerful leaders. Why might we lose you? Because of course, the Nazi U-boat threat. At this point in the war, the Nazis control the seas. The German Admiral Dönitz is his name, has initiated this large campaign called the Wolfpack Campaign to essentially disrupt all shipping across the Atlantic Ocean. And these Nazi Wolfpacks control the ocean. If you want to see a good illustration of this brought to the screen, you should see the movie Greyhound that's recently come out in recent years. It is terrifying to be an American or British convoy crossing the Atlantic. Chances of survival are very difficult. FDR says it's not worth risking, Churchill. Don't do it, don't come. Churchill says, look, it's worth the risk. The world needs to see solidarity from the two leaders of the free world. I want to come. I'm going to come. I won't take no for an answer. FDR, of course, does give him permission. Here's Churchill on the Duke of York battleship crossing the Atlantic, U-boat infested waters. He arrives, by the way, in Washington December 20th, if I'm not mistaken. Actually arrives in New York. Here's the thing. It was such a dangerous journey. It was kept secret. It was one of those secrets that wasn't super well kept. By the time he arrives, a little bit of word has gotten out. And you have a throng of journalists and people there to support his arrival in New York. It was so secretive, FDR couldn't even tell his wife. But he did have to tell his wife, we're preparing for a guest that has very unique tastes. He says, this is Eleanor Roosevelt after the war recounting the story. She says, my husband told me we would be having some guests visit us. He told me that I could not know who was coming, nor how many, but I must be prepared to have them stay over Christmas. He added as an afterthought that I must see to it that we had good champagne and brandy in the house and plenty of whiskey, which maybe ought to have been a clue to her who was coming. Churchill is a notorious drunkard. Somehow he gets through the world. He leads the world through war drinking way too much alcohol. In fact, during his 3 weeks in Washington, I guess he decided, as important as this trip is, I'm also going to have a bit of a vacation, because he had a scotch every morning for breakfast, champagne every day for lunch, and some brandy every evening with dinner, all 3 weeks. He depleted Eleanor Roosevelt's liquor cupboard. Eleanor Roosevelt was actually kind of perturbed by this visit. You should go read what she has to say about it, because as much as we love this story, it really was hard on her. Churchill apparently is not the easiest guest to host. Okay, she says, by the way, it was astonishing to me that anyone could smoke so much and drink so much and keep perfectly well. He could also have a cigar every night just to keep things healthy after his brandy. Okay, so he arrives December 21st in New York. He takes a train. Here's FDR meeting Churchill. Most of you, I assume, know FDR was physically handicapped, paralyzed from the waist down. Very hard to get photos of FDR at any time in his presidency, because he was very hesitant to allow the press to take pictures of him. Here's one of him standing, of course, with the help of an aide. Let's talk a little bit about Churchill's visit at the White House. He spent 3 weeks in the Blue Room, the fanciest room on the bottom floor of the White House. Although the way Eleanor Roosevelt tells the story, the British imperialists, being the colonizers they are, they didn't last very long in the Blue Room. Within a few days, they pretty much conquered the entire bottom floor of the White House. British delegation, which was upsetting to her. But maybe even more upsetting was the intimate friendship that he developed with her husband, a little bit too intimate for his tastes. It turns out Churchill, this is certainly true of Churchill back in the United Kingdom as well. Churchill did not love wearing clothes. Like my 7-year-old son, when he gets home, he takes everything off. Churchill loved to walk around naked, and I guess he found himself really comfortable in the White House because he didn't wear clothes all the time. And this was particularly upsetting to Eleanor. Churchill also didn't mind settling himself right there behind the desk in the Oval Office next to the president. Another fun story about the intimate relationship developed between Churchill and FDR. Apparently, according to all historical records, they really became close friends in these 3 weeks. Not just talking politics and war, but connecting on a personal level, staying late into the night. Churchill was notoriously a late riser. He would stay till 2 or 3 in the morning, wake up 10, 11 in the morning. FDR, he's waking up 5, 6, 7 in the morning, but staying up with Churchill till 2 or 3 every night. This was very upsetting to his wife. Once again, one of the things Eleanor complains about in her recounting of the story. One thing I think is really tender, or it tickles me at least, FDR was, of course, very formal about his wheelchair situation. He had aides push him around in his wheelchair, but Churchill was having none of that. And throughout this trip, I guess, Churchill took over the duties of pushing around FDR in his wheelchair. And so I like the image, preferably of Churchill with his clothes on, of Churchill pushing around FDR in the White House, and that kind of intimate relationship they developed. Okay, December 24th, Christmas Eve, a very remarkable ceremony happens, the Christmas Eve lighting ceremony. You will have seen in the first slide I shared with you guys that enormous national Christmas tree that was lit every year at Christmas time. The lighting of the Christmas tree was a very special thing, well, for multiple reasons. One, I want to point out to you, this is one of the images we have of it. I like how dark this image is. It captures this moment. At this time, in late 1941, a paranoia that a lot of Americans have, it turns out historically to be unfounded, but you can't blame them for having this paranoia. Retrospectively, it's easy to blame them, but at the time it's understandable, was that the Germans, through their U-boat supremacy at the Atlantic Ocean, might place spies, English-speaking spies in America, and gather intelligence, and that it would be easier for them to place spies in the right places if the coast is, of course, lit up. So the East Coast is on blackout throughout 1941 and 1942. So you're not allowed to put up your Christmas tree. You're not allowed to have lights up. So there's a strict prohibition on these things. So 20,000 people showing up aren't just there for the political rally. They're there to see a Christmas tree, a lot of them. They're there to experience Christmas in a way that this war has prohibited them from doing so. 20,000 people show up, millions more by radio. It's a beautiful little ceremony. You can learn about it. There's some songs that are sung, some gorgeous Christmas carols. There's 2 very short speeches given. Very short speeches, one by FDR, followed immediately by Churchill. And I think there's some special lines that we can hone in on. In Roosevelt's speech, I think he does something really remarkable. He starts by saying, how can we celebrate Christmas right now? He identifies the elephant. He says, there are many men and women in America, sincere and faithful men and women, who've asked themselves this Christmas, how can we light our trees? How can we meet and worship with love and with uplifted hearts in a world of war, a world of fighting and suffering and death? And even as we ask these questions, we know an answer. We know the answer. And he does a little bit of a JFK thing, the ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. He says, even in this moment of darkness, I'm going to call on the American people. There is a preparation demanded of this nation beyond and beside the preparation of weapons and materials of war. There is demanded also of us the preparation of our hearts for the labor and the suffering and the ultimate victory which lie ahead. He's not sugarcoating things. We got a long, dangerous mountain to climb together. It's not going to be fun. And we need to prepare ourselves for it emotionally this Christmas. I think that's pretty powerful. The president being able to ask his people something of that at a time of already great struggle. Remember, they're barely out of the Great Depression too. All right, Americans feel, I think an American at this time period is justified to feel a little bit of a no thank you. We've done our trials for the American people so far. Ask the next generation to accomplish this task. Churchill spoke as well. He has some touching things to say, a couple of things that stood out to me. He talks about how he doesn't feel far away from home. I spend this anniversary and festival far from my country, far from my family, and yet I cannot truthfully say that I feel far from home. On this strange Christmas Eve, let's make the children happy in a world of storm. Here then, for one night only, each home throughout the English-speaking world should be a brightly lighted island of happiness and peace. But Churchill, we don't usually associate with the type of person thinking about children in a moment like this, so it touches me at least. Christmas Day, there's an exchange of gifts. There's a couple other fun things. They go to a Methodist service together. Churchill and FDR sit in the front row of a Christian service. But I want to zone in on the day after Christmas a little bit. December 26th, Churchill goes to Congress, and we find out years later has a heart attack, giving a speech trying to rally the troops. He's speaking before American politicians. And it really is a remarkable speech. In preparation for this evening, I watched the whole thing a couple times. It's Churchill at his classic, resonating, bulldog, rallying the troops kind of energetic football coach type of speech. For those who know Churchill, he gives a lot of these famous speeches in his career. My favorite is after Dunkirk in 1940, the British collapse of the British Expeditionary Force on the continent after the Nazis had conquered France. He gives this speech when a lot of people in British Parliament are saying, okay, let's not our war. Nazis don't mind white people. We're fine. But, Lord Halifax and the Conservative faction in the House of Commons, they don't want this war anymore. And Churchill gives this famous speech saying, we probably have heard lines like this: we will defend this island. We will defend the streets. We will defend it in the fields. We will fight in the mountains. And like House of Commons is this very tightly packed, small court. It's very, it's not at all similar to our capital, broad, spacious, Romanesque. And he just lights up the room with this resounding speech. This is his version of that speech a year and a half later to Americans trying to accomplish the same thing. There's one particular line that I think is really cool, and so I captured it. I wanted you to see it. Here we go.
What kind of a people do they think we are? Is it possible they do not realize that we shall never cease to persevere against them until they have been taught a lesson which they and the world will never forget?
It's kind of cool, right? Yeah, I wish we could watch more of it, but we'll run out of time if we do. At the end of the speech, he has this really passionate line where he says, "It's not given to us to see the future, to read into the future. But I promise you that the British and the American people, as the leaders of the free world, will emerge from this nightmare victorious." And these politicians go wild. And he gives this famous victory speech. Have you ever seen Churchill doing the peace sign? Looks like a hippie from the 1960s. But that's our historical anachronism actually working there, because the way Churchill popularized the two fingers sign was not as a peace sign. It's a 1960s thing. It's a reaction to the Vietnam War. He's using it as V for victory. All right, this is our promise of V for victory. And yeah, he has this moment giving his V for victory sign, and Congress gives him this standing ovation as he leaves the Capitol. It's a really cool moment. We're not going to watch the whole speech. Okay. So much for the heartwarming part of the story. Okay, I hope you filled your cup. We're going to try to look at this through a critical analysis now. And I mean, I would be remiss if I did not maybe use the most notorious Churchill quote. And like most Churchill quotes, it's also apocryphal, by the way. We're not 100% sure he said it, although he said a lot of things like it. Americans can always be trusted to do the right thing, but only once they've tried every other option. Right? The famous Churchill quote. You guys, why did we start this story in December of 1941? An astute observer of World War II knows World War II did not begin on December 7th, 1941. It began at least on September 1st, 1939, when the Nazis invade Poland and the British and the French declare war in response on September 3rd, 2 days later. It maybe even begins years earlier with the Japanese invasion of Manchuria in 1933, China in 1937. So the world is crumbling under fascist expansionism while America sits aside. There are a lot of people who look at this time period and wonder why the country that has such high values sat around while things like this were happening, right? Allowed things like this to happen. The French, of course, give us the Statue of Liberty in the late 1800s after they become a democracy, the Third French Republic in 1871, and the symbolism of two Lady Liberties holding a torch, one in Paris, one in New York, lighting democracy across the Atlantic Ocean. The symbolism there was supposed to be democracy will stand up together, right? Why aren't we standing with the world's democracies from 1939 to 1941? That's a messy, complicated, uncomfortable part of the story. Let's go back to Churchill crossing the Atlantic. Let's look at this a second time, this time with a critical analysis. Churchill's not just coming to the United States to, talk about how important Christmas is for children. It's not just a heartwarming act of humanitarian compassion. Churchill has political motivations. Think cynically with me for a second on why Churchill would make a point of emphasis to come to the United States at this moment. Churchill understands that in the United States there's a large political coalition, sometimes called the America First Committee. It was led by a famous aviator, Charles Lindbergh, turned politician, had 800,000 members at its climax, that believes the United States, if we should participate in this war at all, only against Japan. After all, the Germans never attacked the United States. Churchill is worried that the United States will get involved, but not against the greater of the two threats, the Nazi regime. He comes to America in the hope of securing the famous Germany First strategy, which he does secure. He brings a bunch of his military advisors. Before that Christmas Eve lighting ceremony, in fact, on December 23rd, 2 days before Christmas, Churchill, FDR, military advisors from both sides sit down and have a debate. Churchill and his side are able to convince FDR and his military advisors to commit to the Germany First commitment. It's called the Germany First Commitment, which was that we will spend most of our resources actually fighting to defeat Germany first and Japan second. Stop for a second with me and consider the moral complexity of that decision. That's harder, it's not hard to say that the Nazis were bad, but it's a harder argument to say that it was America's job to prioritize defeating Nazism and liberating the world from Nazism when we've been attacked first and foremost by the Japanese. Many people didn't believe in that strategy. They had an argument. Well, the very next day, FDR uses that famous ceremony. Let's look at this lighting ceremony one more time, this time through a critical lens. He uses that Christmas Eve ceremony not just to talk about the long road ahead and to ask Americans, ask not what you can do, what the country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. He's also making a political argument to the American people. He's sullying Christmas with politics a little bit. His political argument in this speech, if you go read it, is that not only is this a hard Christmas and I'm asking the American people to buckle down, but I'm asking them to commit to a strategy that is controversial, that a lot of Americans disagree with. The Americans who disagree with the strategy is sometimes called the America First Committee or the isolationist faction of the American politics. Check out these lines with me. The year 1941, he tells the American people, has brought upon our nation a war of aggression by powers dominated by arrogant rulers whose selfish purpose is to destroy free institutions. They would thereby take from the freedom-loving peoples of the earth the hard-won liberties gained over many centuries. We have joined with many other nations and peoples in a very great cause. Millions of them have been engaged in the task of defending good with their lifeblood for months and for years. You see the argument he's making? This war is not just about the American people. We're actually going to join a much broader global cause here. The whole free world is fighting for their freedom. Their rights and freedom matter just as much as ours. Their liberties matter just as much as ours. They have been giving up their lifeblood for our principles and our beliefs. It's time for us to join them with our blood. This is a controversial argument. After all, somebody could respond to that and say, why? Where in the Constitution, Mr. Roosevelt, does it say that it was the right of the government to put other peoples outside of our borders on the same level as us. Isn't the government's primary task to serve our interests first, maybe even our interests only? Government serves us, our people, not foreign peoples. That's a powerful argument that a lot of Americans believe in, and FDR is addressing that argument. He's disagreeing with it. He's using this Christmas message to gravitate people towards political argument. Guys, I hate to bring politics into Christmas, but politics was part of Christmas in 1941, this political argument. In fact, a week later, on New Year's Day, he starts the famous Arcadia Conference from early January until about January 12th, where a bunch of military and political leaders, members of Congress as well, get together to declare the famous Declaration of the United Nations. FDR came up with the name for this declaration, Declaration of the United Nations. And in this declaration, it's an extension of something some of you might know as what was called the Atlantic Charter in August of 1941. It's essentially a diplomatic agreement that says, not only are we going to fight in this war together and prioritize defeating the Germans first, but we're also going to commit, the United States and the British government, we're going to commit to a combined strategy after this war to defend freedom and the principal institutions of freedom, such as democracy. We're committing to a global strategy and foreign policy as part of this war. That was a very controversial declaration. Most historians of the United Nations say this is the origins, at least of the name of the United Nations, this famous declaration that FDR came up with. If you are somebody who is at all interested in politics, you will know that the United Nations to this day is extremely controversial. I think I saw just 2 days ago while I was preparing this, Elon Musk tweeted an image of the United Nations flag torn in half with like a brutal dictator standing behind it. There are a lot of Americans who don't believe that these global international organizations serve our interests and we should put America first instead. The origins of this controversy go back to Christmas 1941. Okay, let's get to that Churchill speech. He has a heart attack. Oh, by the way, I feel like I left that hanging without telling you the rest of the story. He didn't die. He's fine. It was a minor heart attack. In fact, it was so minor, he went back to the Blue Room, his physician diagnosed it, and then they kept it secret. The last thing they wanted was the image of weakness, when this was supposed to be an image of strength, unity, and power for the free world. So that famous heart attack was kept secret until after the war. We actually don't find out about 1946. In this speech he gives, it's not just resounding, we will fight on the beaches, we will fight in the field. He also makes a political argument. In fact, Churchill being the blunt British guy, he's so blunt, he might as well have been a German. Churchill is not afraid of offending people. Here he stands in front of America's Congress, and he's going to critique the United States of America the day after Christmas. To be fair to Churchill, he's a brilliant rhetorician. And so he actually starts with a compliment, and actually a very revealing one, powerful one. He starts the speech talking about democracy. Here, you guys, is the leader of the United Kingdom, the country we revolted against in 1776. Okay? The monarchy whose principles we revolted against, the monarchy that tried to stop democracy from coming into existence, its leader is now standing before the United States of America Congress declaring democracy the superior system of government. I mean, what a victory all these years later this was for the American people. He says to the American Congress, I was brought up in my father's house to believe in democracy. Trust the people. That was his message. We rejected the old aristocratic saying, the world was for the few and for the very few. That saying, by the way, is from one of the most famous British prime ministers, Benjamin Disraeli, who hated democracy. Here's Churchill subtly saying, we've been wrong. All these years later, America, you were right. You won the revolution, not just militarily, but I am here to announce your moral, intellectual, political victory as well. Your principles were superior to ours. And this is maybe my favorite line from this speech. He says, I have been in full harmony all my life with the tides which have flowed on both sides of the Atlantic against privilege and monopoly. And I have steered confidently towards the Gettysburg ideal of the government of the people, by the people, for the people. It's quoting Abraham Lincoln. Maybe the most important speech in American history, the Gettysburg Address in 1863. Here is the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom quoting that speech, declaring this was Abraham Lincoln's definition of democracy, government of the people, by the people, for the people. My students know this is my favorite way to define what a democracy is. Here's Winston Churchill saying Abraham Lincoln was right. That is the appropriate form of government, one that does this. It governs of the people, by the people, for the people, the Gettysburg ideal. But then he goes on to say, it's not just the United Kingdom and the United States. You go listen to his speech. He makes a very subtle political transition. He says, it's not just us that have democracy or that deserve democracy. In a dozen famous ancient states in the world, now prostrate under the Nazi yoke, the masses of the people, all classes and creeds, await the hour of liberation. So we stand in this war not only to defend our principles, but to defend the rights of democracy for the world. Okay, again, he's pounding in on this argument that he and FDR, they're in lockstep arguing from the December 23rd, December 24th, lighting the Christmas tree ceremony, now 2 days later, and then at the Arcadia conference a week later. They're on message. Here's his critique of the United States. This is pretty gutsy. Twice in a single generation, the catastrophe of world war has fallen upon us. Twice in our lifetime has the long arm of fate reached out across the oceans to bring the United States into the forefront of the battle. If we had kept together after the last war, if we had taken common measures for our safety, this renewal of the curse need never have fallen upon us. Do we not owe it to ourselves, to our children, to tormented mankind, to make sure that these catastrophes do not engulf us for the third time? You see the critique he's making there? Like, this wasn't actually necessary, America. Where were you guys? 2 world wars now, you guys weren't there from the beginning. You came at halftime, right? You're late to the game both times. So we're going to step in the river, the same river twice, 3 times. Come on, let's correct our mistakes, America. Now, of course, he's careful. This is a subtle political critique. But his suggestion is that the United States didn't play the role in global leadership fighting for democracy abroad that it needed to have been fighting all along. And now that they're coming, it's almost as if it were too late. This final line, I want you to think if you agree with him. This is a controversial political statement. Do we not owe it to ourselves, to our children, to tormented mankind to make sure that these catastrophes do not engulf us for the third time? Really? Is it America's responsibility to stop global conflicts abroad from happening? One could just as well argue it's not our fault. It's not our problem. We deal with our problems. We put America's interests first. We don't worry about the world's problems. They can handle their own problems. That is a legitimate argument. It has just as much justification in the Constitution as Churchill and Roosevelt's argument. This is a controversial statement he's making before Congress. Okay, so let's tie things up. I was told not to go any later than 8 o'clock. I might even finish before then, so we're fine on time. Do we have to be such a Grinch? Can't this just be a nice Christmas story, you know? Do we need the politics to be involved here? I would say yes. Let me defend why it's important to think through these messy, complicated questions. One of my favorite historians, his name is Thomas Nipperdey, he's a German historian. I should say, and Professor Paul did, to be fair, he did say that, you know, I do study Nazi history, German history. I am by first training a German European historian. I come to American history kind of as a secondary field. I feel a little bit like an atheist speaking at church every time I speak to an American audience, especially about World War II from the American perspective. So I'm going to bring a German historian into the conversation. Thomas Nipperdey. He has this argument interpreting history that I've always just really loved. I find it really capturing. He says, we too often speak about national values. Our country has American values. Germany has German values. In reality, he says it's not very efficient or historically accurate way to think about a country's long story. A better way to think of it is what he says through multiple continuities. There are different sets of American values. In the Constitution, there was the set of values pro-slavery, 3/5 clause, fugitive slave clause. There was also a set of values in the Constitution that opposed those things. Those things coexisted together. In the Constitution, there is a pretty clear argument for the separation of church and state. There's also a federalistic argument that says religion can play a role in state politics. So are we a Christian nation or are we a secular nation? Both of those values are embedded into our history. Both can make claim on the Constitution. It doesn't easily answer those questions for us. This is Thomas Nipperdey's argument. I love this argument. That in reality, all nations' histories are a back and forth story between competing sets of values. And I think if we bring this to foreign policy, America's relationship in the world, if I can somewhat with a bit of a broad brush, paint maybe 2 competing sets of values, and there's probably more, and then camps within these camps. But I think there's a lot of historians that would agree with me in saying that you can read 2 different foreign policy traditions, at least, back to the founding. The policy of isolationism versus the policy of interventions. The Churchillian Rooseveltian argument that I've been giving to you today, or been presenting to you, is very much in this tradition of what we sometimes call interventionism. Believe it or not, most historians would say it's a relatively new foreign policy. Maybe goes back a little bit before Roosevelt, maybe to Woodrow Wilson in World War I. If you've heard, my students will know this. Make the world safe for democracy, not make America safe for democracy. Make the world safe for democracy was the slogan of World War I. Woodrow Wilson commits to this war, arguing it's America's job to spread democracy. So we see a little bit of that tradition come even before 1941, but most historians would say this is not the guiding foreign policy of the United States until 1941, until Roosevelt and Churchill organized America's war effort behind this interventionist foreign policy. It then stays our foreign policy through the Cold War. Some of you probably have heard of the domino theory or the Truman Doctrine, that it's the responsibility of the United States to stop the spread of communism anywhere and everywhere. If that's Vietnam, it doesn't matter. We stop the spread before it spreads beyond. We have to quarantine evil and tyranny. It's America's job to be involved abroad. You guys, before this tradition took hold, for most of American history, there's a very different tradition. Now, I want you to see it has just as much of a claim to the Constitution as Churchill and Roosevelt did. George Washington disagreed. I imagine if George Washington would have been at the Arcadia Conference, he would have been very disappointed. He probably rolled over in his grave. If you read George Washington's writings from the time of the founding, he has, of course, this one famous speech, Washington's Farewell Address, where he talks about his disdain broadly for foreign relationships, for foreign policy. He talks about it as entanglements. That the more you get involved with the world gets involved with you and spreads its diseases and evil things and ideas and cultures into us and degrades the American idea from within. The best thing we can do is, to the extent we possibly can, put up a bubble to save this precious experiment that is our Republican Constitution. It's a famous speech, Washington's Farewell Address, but he's hardly the only one. Okay, the Whig Party throughout the early 1800s is well known as being a minority party, but one of the things it fought for from its minority position is it didn't like all of this expansionism into Native American territory, and it didn't like the expansionism against the Mexican Republic in 1848. In fact, Abraham Lincoln was one of those Whigs who didn't think that that was appropriate. Charles Lindbergh, of course, I've already taught you about him in the American First Committee, who just really doesn't believe after the mistake we made in their view of World War I. 115,000 Americans die in the trenches of World War I for what? Says a lot of Americans like Charles Lindbergh. For what? What did they die for? What did we get out of that? That's a lot of precious boys we slaughtered on the altar of ideals. So they're naturally going to be upset about America getting involved more in World War II, especially getting involved against the Germans. So there's that tradition too. But from the very beginning, there were some Americans who opposed it, like Thomas Jefferson, who disagreed with George Washington, who wanted us, for example, to get more involved in the French Revolution, which followed our revolution back in the late 18th century. So both of these traditions, these multiple continuities, if you will, have been competing in this broad debate. And if there's a thought I can leave you with, is that the debate is ongoing. It's not settled. Oftentimes when I teach my history classes, what I like to try to do is find these conflicts in history, find these disagreements, find these debates, and invite my students to develop their own opinion on it and realize the debates aren't over. The disagreements that George Washington and Thomas Jefferson had over America getting involved, is that an entanglement or do we owe something to the French? That debate never ended. It's still ongoing, and I think it's now our turn to take on the torch of this debate. We have to decide for ourselves if we agree more with George Washington or Churchill and Roosevelt. And it's not an easy decision. We'd like it to be easy. We want our Christmas stories to be tinsel wrapped and all fuzzy feeling. Unfortunately, I think this Christmas story from 1941 is actually a lot more challenging. Take, for example, the two foreign policies that are dividing our politics right now. I'm doing my best not to sound biased. Okay, present them both as faithfully as I can. What is sometimes called liberal internationalism. Certainly the foreign policy that would define, I think, the Biden administration, the administration Kamala Harris wanted to have. Here's the ideas, says Kamala Harris. There are some in the United States who, this is her speaking, by the way, at the Munich Security Conference in 2024 before Joe Biden dropped out of the election. So she's speaking as Vice President of the United States to our European allies in Munich. There are some people in the United States who suggest something, and she's very subtly saying Donald Trump and the Republicans, our opponents on the other side of the political aisle, who say it is in the best interest of the American people to isolate ourselves from the world, to embrace dictators. She's not so subtly mentioning Putin there. And abandon commitments to our allies. The American people must ask ourselves whether it is in America's interest to continue to engage with the world or turn inward, whether it is our interest to defend longstanding rules and norms that have provided for unprecedented peace and prosperity, or to allow them to be trampled, whether it is in America's interest to fight for democracy or to accept the rise of dictators, and whether it is in America's interest to continue to work in lockstep with our allies and partners or go it alone. Let's put that paragraph in conversation with a different speech, a very different politician leading a very different political coalition. Donald Trump, the Make America Great Again movement, or sometimes actually Donald Trump uses for his slogans, this is of course the most famous one, MAGA. You've probably seen the Republican Party use the slogan America First, drawing actually from our tradition back to Charles Lindbergh and the America First Committee, using the same rhetoric and language. Here's him in 2018 speaking about how he went to the same Unix security conference. This was 6 years earlier. He came back, and here's Trump speaking to a bunch of his supporters at a rally, recounting how that conference went. You'll notice it's a very different argument. I told all the European nations they take such advantage of us. They're not taking advantage of us anymore. Under Republican leadership, America is winning again. We're putting America first. It hasn't happened in a lot of decades. But radical Democrats want to turn back the clock toward the rule of corrupt, power-hungry globalists. And I really want you to think about this word as we bring this to a close. I think the word globalist perfectly describes Winston Churchill and FDR and their foreign policy vision. I don't think it describes George Washington, but it definitely does FDR and Churchill. Hopefully you agree I've showed you the evidence today, right? Globalist. Trump says, you know what a globalist is, right? A globalist is a person who wants the globe to do well without frankly caring about our country so much. You know what I am, he says, in contrast, I am a nationalist. So nationalism, globalism. When we think about this Christmas story of 1941, I'd encourage you to develop your own opinion if you think that it is the responsibility of the United States to not only serve our interests, but to just as passionately serve the global interests of democracy and human rights? Or is that a corrupt, Donald Trump would say, globalist mistake? Instead, we should serve our nation's interests first. Should we be nationalists or should we be globalists? The Christmas story of 1941 certainly fits into that broader debate, but I don't know if it necessarily definitively answers the question. So I'd encourage you to answer it for yourself. Merry Christmas. Thank you so much for your time. That's all I have for you today. Here's my sources that I mostly drew from.